We will start with the Council. Mrs. Chiot speaking on behalf of the Council.
Oh, pleacă. Încep?
Ich möchte diejenigen bitten, die dieser
I'd like to ask those who do not wish to listen to this statement to leave the chamber very quickly indeed, please. Mr. VODChapter, Mr. Bullman, please do not converse in the chamber.
Herr Kollege Schwab.
Mr. Schwab.
Niște fotografii o să obținem de la domnul care ne face așa.
Darf ich die Kolleginnen und Kollegen bitten?
Might I ask colleagues
So, die Kollegen von 5 Stelle bilden.
5-star colleagues seem to be forming a penalty wall in the chamber. Mrs. Chiot.
Members, first of all, I would like to thank President Tajani for his letter which the Council received last week. I can assure you that we are committed to promote gender balance. This is an important issue, and the gender balance among the top staff of EU official financial bodies is also a key issue for the Council. At the same time, the selection procedures are based on rules that we have to respect. The Council has always acted and will continue to act in line with all relevant provisions of EU laws as regards its role in appointments. I would also expect that all other institutions involved act within the legal framework and do their utmost to promote gender balance. Against this background, I was surprised that the Parliament raises this issue specifically with the Council. President Tajani's letter refers to legal acts that regulate appointment to 3 EU legal organs. These 3 bodies are the Single Supervisory Board, the Banking Stakeholder Group within the European Banking Authority, and the third one, the Single Resolution Board. Please allow me to clarify that the Council is not involved in drawing up shortlists nor in selecting successful candidates for any of these 3 bodies. The shortlist for the appointments to the Single Resolution Board are provided by the Commission. Candidates for the Single Supervisory Board are the responsibility of the European Central Bank. Subsequently, for both of these boards, the European Parliament decides on the successful contenders. The Council's role is limited to formally approving the selection made by the Parliament. As regards appointment to the European Banking Authority, the Council has no role to play at all. Regarding the selection of members of the ECB Executive Board, the Council does indeed have its role in the selection procedure. I can assure you that we reiterate the importance of gender balance in each selection procedure and call on Member States to propose female candidates. I do trust that all EU institutions involved in preparing shortlists and selecting the candidates do observe and respect the principle of gender balance, and that they will continue to do so in the future. As Presidency of the EU Council, Romania will continue to promote at European level the principle of gender balance through facilitating debates on possible ways forward and advancing the legislative agenda, especially the negotiations on the Women on Board Directive. Important progress in this area of action has already been achieved through the consistent effort of both the EU Council and the European Parliament with respect to the Work-Life Balance Directive, on which we were able to finalise negotiations. We are determined to bring our contribution to mainstreaming gender balance within the EU agenda in order to ensure a fair and equitable environment in our societies and within our labour markets. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mrs. Chut. On behalf of the Commission, Commissioner Jourova.
Mr. President, honourable members, on behalf of the Commission, including Vice President Dombrovskis and Commissioner Moscovici, who are in Brussels this morning to the ECOFIN Council, I would like to thank you for this opportunity to exchange on gender balance in EU financial bodies. President Juncker has replied yesterday to the letter sent by President Tajani on this matter. First of all, let me emphasise that this Commission is fully committed to the principle of gender balance and has taken decisive action in this regard. 39.6% of middle and senior management is now female, up from 30% in November 2014. The number of female directors general has increased from 14% to 30%, from 5 to 12. The number of female deputy directors general has increased from 8% to 42%. It means from just 3 to 20. We also agree that women continue to be particularly underrepresented in executive positions in the field of banking and financial services. Women only account for about 15% of private executives. The under-representation of women can also be observed in the public sector entities in this field. Women rarely make up more than a third of governing bodies of most national central banks. The under-representation of women can be observed in a similar way in the applications for positions in EU agencies active in this field. On average, there are 4 to 5 times more male candidates than female candidates. On the specific cases you are debating today, I would like to stress that it follows from Article 283/2 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union that the Commission plays no role in the appointment of a new member of the Executive Board of the European Central Bank. As regards the European Banking Authority, the Commission's role is limited to assisting the Board of Supervisors in relation to the appointment of the chairperson of the European Banking Authority. For the Single Resolution Board, currently chaired by a woman, the Commission is indeed entrusted with providing the European Parliament a short list of candidates for the positions of chair, vice chair and other members of the board. In line with the relevant regulation establishing the board, appointments are to be based on merit, skills, knowledge of banking and financial matters, and on relevant expertise and experience. Moreover, in line with Article 56/4 of that regulation, candidates shall be chosen on the basis of an open selection procedure which shall respect the principles of gender balance, experience and qualification. The Commission is strongly in favour of supporting women with the necessary qualifications reaching top positions. We have taken this into account and rigorously respected the legal requirements in the selection procedures and have kept the European Parliament informed at all stages of the process. In the cases of the chair of the European Banking Authority and the position of the board member of the Single Resolution Board, several candidates, including female candidates failed to meet the eligibility criteria, often because they did not have the required minimum professional or senior management experience in the field of finance. We look forward to continuing the cooperation with this House on this very important matter. In the cases where the Commission has a role in the process, the Commission will continue to pay close attention to the issue of gender balance when composing shortlists of candidates for the EU financial services agencies. Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank, Frau Kommissarin.
Thank you, Commissioner Jourova. 1.5 minutes for Mrs. De Lange.
Ja, dank u wel, meneer de voorzitter. Ik kom hier nog een beetje...
Thank you very much indeed. I must say I've had to rush in here. I'm somewhat breathless. I've only been able to hear about half of what's been said. But I was on FaceTime on my telephone and was able to follow to some degree. At the same time, I've had to be on the phone to home, so it's difficult for women in many situations to combine work and family life. We're looking at the tip of the iceberg with the 3 nominations on the agenda. There are many other issues. For example, the Italian representative of the political group is one possibility. We could have an Italian man in this situation. This is unfortunately a symbolic debate. We're looking for balanced gender representation. Sometimes it's the case in some political groups. But sometimes not, if their own candidates aren't effective. So many will take the floor in this debate and will have their own motivations. Now, where should we begin? As the Commission has already said, the problem is that for positions of high office, there are very few women who can be selected. So it's up to us to ensure that women do get these qualifications in banking, government, in everyday business and political life. It's important then to have a capacity to combine work and family life. How is it possible that 5, 6 or 7-year-old children, when they are asked about what gender a firefighter or a doctor or another typically male profession is, generally expect it to be a man. The same with astronaut, the same with a surgeon. So children need to be aware that there are other possibilities. Thank you.
Spricht Frau Kollegin Bresso.
Mrs. Bresso, 1 minute.
Thank you very much indeed. As what we were just reminded of, the procedure was indeed stuck to, so we will be voting on this, but the problem is a lot more complex than is suggested. And as the Commissioner reminded us, we are grappling with underrepresentation of women in all management positions at all levels, most certainly in private companies and in banking and monetary institutions. This underrepresentation is even more worrying. But how will we invert this trend? If there are no candidates, what can you do? We need to ensure that the candidates are out there, so we need to make it easier for women to pursue a career, particularly in these institutions. So we need to tell young women that they can study economics and pursue a job therein. So if you tell them that economics is a dead end, nothing will happen and we won't get candidates. So please, Commission, let's not to just have hot air, but really do actively call on the member states to promote technical, economic and scientific studies for women to ensure that we get the right candidates in place.
Thank you. 1.5 minutes for Mrs. Trebesius. Yes, thank you very much, President. Brandenburg, the German regional state, has decided that there should be equal membership of men and women in their regional assembly. I mention that as an example. The justification is that Parliament should be equally made up of men and women because that reflects the situation in society. Now, of course, 50% of voters are women, and they can vote either for men or women as their members of Parliament. The challenge is that the proportion of women in political life is significantly lower than in society as a whole. I've taken part in many party events, and it's not usually more than 15 to 20% participation by women. How can a balanced representation come about? Is this really fair, what we've got now, and what advice should we take into account with regard to the participation of women? What do we want to do in terms of religions? Do we want to include balance for Christians, Buddhists and so on? What about gays, transgenders, people with diabetes, the old, the thin, and so on? Where do we draw the borderline? Our democracy allows people to decide to vote for those whom they think represent them best. We can put our trust in them, and it's the same for economic life. It's the best qualified people, the most suited people for a given job, who should get the job, irrespective of their gender. And I say that because I'm a construction engineer by training. When I began my studies 30 years ago, the ratio of women was 15%, and nothing much has changed in the ensuing decades. We have to recognise that men and women are different. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mrs. Trebesius. And now, Mr. Torvalds.
Tack, herr talman. Vi hörde i de föregående förklaringarna både från rådet och från...
Thank you very much. The statements, or during the statements of the Council and the Commission, we've heard the best possible excuses for the current situation. According to this logic, we can assume that we're left in a situation where nothing more can be done. The situation's been clearly described. We're told that there are women with the right skills at the highest level, and when they exist, they are selected for a job. But when we talk about other subjects, when we say, for example, the flight is delayed, we're told it's delayed because it's a late incoming aircraft. It's delayed because it's delayed. The result is the cause, and that's the same logic we're left with here. We're told that brains are different. We've just heard a colleague speak who says that men and women are different. When men think, are they different? What we need is an overall vision. If we look back at the 2008 crisis, we saw banks run by men which entered into a crisis as a result of decisions taken by men. So we need more women in decision-making bodies. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Torvalds. And now, 1 minute, Mr. Giegold. Thank you, President. The fresh proposals from Council and Commission for the leadership and for the shortlists for leadership posts in EU financial institutions are really obsolete. The time when only men would be put forward is not for the 21st century, and that means here it's not a question of men and women being different, as has just been stated, but the fact that for a long time now women have occupied leading roles in finance and in academia, and they expect equal representation. For years, Parliament has been plugging away at this question. How long are we going to look on passively? And I call on colleagues to be consistent here. This means appointing people. We expect a balanced proposal from Council and Commission to overturn this obsolete situation in the appointment of men and women. Thank you, Mr. Giegold. Mrs. Matthias.
Obrigada, Sr. Presidente.
Thank you very much. Gender equality is a fundamental human right, but it seems to be a dead letter once it comes to economic and monetary issues, because generally women tend to be swept aside. The directives of on the boards of the EU, there are very few women, only 2 out of 25 on the ECB. The Council says the Council is washing its hands of this, as is the Commission, but it is the Commission who is presenting the final list. In the final list, there are very few women. Women are absent. We do have competent women with the right specialist knowledge. This saying just this is an insult to women and to humanity as a whole. It's a crying shame. As long as we still have these lists of nominations just consisting of men, while the EP should shoulder its responsibilities and not to trample on justice in the EU and fairness.
Thank you, Mrs. Matthias. And now, Mrs. Dornano, 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President. On 26th of March, there was an exchange of views with Mr. Philip Lam, who's been selected for a member of the Governing Board of the European Central Bank, Mr. Compa for the post of President for the European Banking Authority, and Mr. Sebastian Nuaviola for the position of member of the Single Dispute Settlement Board. So, as has often been the case, women are underrepresented in the leadership positions of the finance sector. That's not surprising when you consider that only 39% of leadership and management positions are occupied by women. We like talking about this. We like debates. We like generating hot air, I may even say, but when it comes to actual action, there's very little happening. If you look at the leadership of the European Union, the Commission in Brussels, of the 13 presidents of the European Commission, not a single one has been a woman. Not one amongst the founding fathers of the European Union. Out of 28 European commissioners, there are 9 women. Is this something that we should find normal? Out of 250 million women in Europe, is it so difficult to find 14 ones with sufficient skills? Obviously it is. All of this is clearly deliberate. Nothing is being done to set an example at the head of the European institutions. When we see what Mr. Juncker has done, where he's tousled the hair of an official, the assistant head of protocol, we see what the example being set is. Is this what we want? Is it the example which is given by Mr. Juncker that we want to follow? The Treaty of Rome set in stone the principle of wage equality since 1957. However, 60 years later, the effects are still with us. The wage gap between men and women is still huge in the EU, in the founding countries. So we need to leave words of good intention behind us and move to specific action.
Thank you, Mrs. Dornano. And now Mr. Sosnierz, 1 minute.
It's once again that we are celebrating the sick obsession of this institution in terms of equality. You are showing that you are completely detached from the reality. A toddler has more common sense than members of this parliament. You have a lot of proof that there are not enough women to work on these positions, and you still think you know better. You still think women can do it, could do it, feel that they could do it. You know better than the women themselves. You want to force them to realize your ludicrous vision for women. You speak about women as half of the electorate, and so what? There are minors also in our societies who are not represented in the parliament. The age is not yet to be able to vote. And so what? Does it mean that they are discriminated against? Shall we now look at the balance between, let's say, drivers and interpreters in the parliament? Men and women are interpreters. Should we switch them with drivers who are male?
Vielen Dank.
Thank you, Mr. Sośnierz. Mr. Sośnierz, will you allow a question from Mrs. Woutmans?
Herr Kollege Sośnierz. Frau Kollegin Woutmans.
Mrs. Woutmans.
Dank u wel, meneer de voorzitter. Ik denk dat alle...
Thank you very much, President. I think that all women here in the room today will be indignant. I think we should all protest against this.
En niet intelligent. Ik denk dat het onwaarschijnlijk is.
I think we should say that it's really not on for you to speak on behalf of women.
Ist nicht für eine Stellungnahme, sondern für eine Frage.
It's meant to be a question, the blue card procedure, not a statement. And if you don't ask a question within 30 seconds, I have no hope that the question will actually be asked. There are 30 seconds allowed for a blue card. I'm very liberal, but it's for a question, not for a statement, however indignant one might be. Very briefly.
Shortly, very short, finish the question, please.
Okay. Can you repeat?
Micro.
Oké. Kan u alsjeblieft uw statement herhalen dat u denkt...
Would you mind repeating your statement that women are less suitable to undertake the same jobs as men? That's what I wanted. That's what I thought I understood from what you said.
Nie powiedziałem, że w parlamencie brakuje inteligencji, tylko rozsądku. Nie wiem jak...
I said it is not intelligence that we are lacking here, it's common sense that we are lacking. And facts state that women are better suited for some jobs and men are better suited than other jobs. For example, interpreters, most of them are female, maybe they are better suited to do interpreting, and there are more drivers who are men, so maybe men are better suited for driving. Genders have different talents and let's just accept it.
Vielen Dank. Wir haben die Frage.
Thank you very much indeed. I think we've heard the question and answer, and I think the reason behind questions is the same, so I'll only allow for one further blue card. I'm less strict with those who have respected speaking time. That wasn't an attack of generosity, but when Mr. Landy spoke, I gave her a lot of slack, so I think I wanted to ensure balance between the political groups. The next speaker is Mr. Ferber for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Dear colleagues, we do not have a gender balance in the leading bodies of the European financial institutions, no doubt about that. That is not a secret. This imbalance at European level is due to the fact that domestically there's an imbalance in the boards of the national supervisory authorities. So there are very few upcoming female board members. So I'd call on the Council to look at the national structures and see to it that the talents of women are kindled. We do need to conduct this debate, obviously, but what about all this hypocrisy running through this debate? Some groups have really got hot under the collar. They had a major opportunity, a prime opportunity to appoint a woman once again to the board, and the groups who've got so hot under the collar plump for a man rather than a woman. In the EPP we said that if somebody has the same qualifications, then the women should have priorities. Emails and letters did the rounds, which were very discriminatory. This is quite unprecedented and will have legal consequences. So I would launch an appeal to all colleagues. When we have the opportunity to appoint a woman, we should do this and not have a false debate in the plenary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ferber. Mr. Yetenmeki, was that a question for Mr. Ferber, or is that a blue card for Mr. Suchnic?
Excuse me, is this a question to Mr. Ferber, or was this blue card from the intervention of Mr. Soschnitt? So then I cannot accept it. Es spricht Frau Kollegin.
Ms. Beres, you have the floor for 2 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President. Almost a year ago, on the 8th of March, the President of the institution wrote to the European authorities following the appointment of Mr. de Guindos, asking for appointments at the central bank in future to involve the Parliament receiving a shortlist, a minimum of 3 names of candidates at least, with gender balance in mind. And that wasn't the case this time with Mr. Philip Behm, and we would ask the Central Bank and the Commission to step up their efforts for the next nomination. Now, you say your role is limited, but you can change the situation here, because there comes a time when the situation is no longer acceptable, and that time is now. It is not on in the financial institutions, let alone other institutions, for the balance of the genders not to be respected. I note that you've made this commitment within the Commission, but you really have to change the basic situation here. And in the forthcoming Parliament, in the forthcoming term, each member state should put forward a man and a woman as candidates for the Commission role. So there's a gender balance, and the same applies to economics and finance. Where there's a shortlist, the shortlist must contain a gender balance. At some time, Parliament is going to have to shoulder its responsibilities here. I hear the EPP fighting a sly backdoor battle against the S&D group, saying that at the time of the appointments being made, we didn't put forward a woman. Well, you're saying that a woman would always have to be chosen, and I don't think our group can be accused of playing unfair on this point. For political reasons, the only nominations on the agenda Thursday next will be as we know it, even then the speaker is cut off.
Verständnis bei Kollegen.
Thank you very much. I would ask for indulgence of those colleagues who have gone beyond the speaking time. I now give the floor for 2.5 minutes to Mr. Piotrowski.
Thank you so much, President, colleagues. Today we talk about gender equality when it comes to 3 candidates for very often very important positions in EU economic and monetary affairs. Our Parliament is supposed to approve those nominations that were presented in the so-called shortlist. The ECR group supports gender balance in the process of nominating such candidates and approving the nominations. But we want to have also geographical balance. All of those candidates originate from the so-called Western Europe, the so-called old EU. Whereas in the Central and Eastern Europe, I don't think you can say that you would lack candidates with the required competence for such positions. However, we have to remember that all of those candidates need to be, first of all, qualified to exercise these functions. And they do. So I don't think that gender is the only feature analyzed in such a process. And also, I would like to mention that the European Commission currently comprises 28 commissioners, including 19 men and only 9 women. I think it's a clear sign that gender balance is not fully exercised as a right in this very important institution. So maybe talking about gender balance, the Commission should look at itself first. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Piotrowski, Ms. Indeveld, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think Mr. Sośnierz just proved beyond any doubt why we cannot possibly leave it to men to run the world. Now, colleagues, for many years we've been having this debate now, and every time we hear the same argument saying, well, this time the appointment of the male candidate should go ahead, but next time, really, next time we'll have a gender-balanced ballot paper. But we've been hearing this for many years. It is just not credible anymore. And what is also interesting is this is not about men being better than women or women better than men. It is a known fact that diverse teams perform better. Now, we are talking about something very serious here. We're talking about governance and oversight of the financial sector. So why do we settle for an inferior team rather than having the strongest possible team to oversee this sector? We've also heard some of our colleagues say, oh, but there are not enough qualified female candidates. Come on, people. We are living in the European Union with over 500 million citizens, and you're telling me there are not sufficient candidates. And finally, Chair, the EPP has been accusing, last sentence, Chair, the EPP is...
Vielen Dank, Frau Kollegin Infeld. Es spricht nun...
Thank you very much, Ms. Infeld.
Frau Kollegin Infeld, Herr Kollege Ferber.
Ms. Infeld, Mr. Ferber, your heated contributions are interesting for me because they're in English, but unfortunately your microphones have been cut off. The interpreters won't be able to translate them. I now give the floor to Ms. Scott-Cato.
That economics is dominated by men. Could it be related to the fact that men own the overwhelming volume of the world's assets, with just 8 men owning the same amount of wealth as the whole of half of the world? Conventional economics is dominated by the rational economic man, a man who arrives as a full-grown adult in the world of work and ignores the mother who raised him, the teachers who educated him, the people who nursed him back to health. Whenever women come into any sphere, they bring different perspectives and insights. We don't have to argue about whether we're better or worse. We only have to accept that my half of the human race deserves to be fully represented in all domains where power is exercised, including the economy. As a female economist, I'm tired of waiting for a world where women play an equal role in finance and economics. I will no longer collude in a process of uttering hypocritical words and then taking no action. I will not support any more men to be appointed to the boards of the financial regulatory bodies until the shortlists include at least 1 woman.
Vielen Dank, Frau Kollegin Scott-Cato.
Thank you very much, Ms. Scott-Cato. For 1.5 minutes, Mr. Vegas, you have the floor.
Thanks very much. This raises 2 problems, this matter. Firstly, gender equality, which it is plain to see is not complied with in the supervisory bodies or in the ECB. This also raises another equally important issue, a democratic oversight of these institutions. The agencies, particularly the ECB, when they were set up, they were meant to be politically neutral institutions with a technical role. But as time wore on, they've gained supervisory powers. They now control aid and assistance programs, but there has never been the necessary democratic oversight to go hand in hand with this. The Parliament's involvement in choosing the managers of these institutions is just a facade. It's a farcical version of democracy. The lists of candidates which are meant to be provided to us contain just 1 woman, often 0. And the only time we had access to a list with various female candidates, the final choice did not even comply with the decision taken in this House. residual female presence in the institutions is something I cannot get my head round. It is intolerable, but this reflects the opaque and anti-democratic nature of these institutions, where high finance holds sway and there is no sincere will to conduct oversight.
Thank you very much, Mr. Viegas. And I give the floor to Ms. Esther Esferagut. Thank you, President. There's one more woman in the Executive Committee out of 6. In the Central Banking Agency, all of the candidates have been men. In the other bodies, the same. The single supervisory mechanism, the President is a man. The 3 European supervisory bodies, also the Presidents are men. It's clear that the power structures are unequal. There is a clear gender imbalance in financial banking services, in particular the executive positions. It's also clear that one of the values of the European Union is gender equality and the gender perspective to ensure mainstreaming. It's on the same level as ensuring human rights, and that's why it's necessary to break stereotypes, as Mr. Sonias has failed to recognize. We need to break stereotypes, we need to work against them, and in so doing achieve an egalitarian society also in the economic sphere. Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. I now would ask you whether you'd allow a question from your colleague Mr. Sośnierz. Please go ahead.
Dysponujemy na YouTubie
if you check YouTube, you will see statistics who watches what, and you can see very clearly that if there are little films, political films, they are watched in 80% by men. And it's not because bad, evil Sośnierz would ban women from watching those films, but because women are not interested in politics. What would you do to make them interested?
It was not a question.
Herr Kollege Sośnierz, das war keine Frage.
That was not a question, Mr. Sośnierz.
Było pytanie, zapytałem, co pani zamierza...
It was a question. What would you do about the fact that women do not watch political films on YouTube? How would you make them?
Bitte.
Please go ahead. Thank you. Well, it's a scandal that you occupy a seat in this Parliament which represents the values of the European institutions. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Esther Esferagut. Ms. Toya, you have the floor.
Non voglio sprecare neanche un secondo.
I don't even want to waste a second of my speaking time, but I have to express the shame at hearing such backward voices in Parliament when we're discussing women's affairs. I think it's a defeat for us as we close the legislative term with the same story. Parliament asks and Council doesn't respond to the microscopic participation of women in financial institutions. I don't think it's about the principle of gender balance so much, and principles do have their abstract value. It's more about the general interest here. I don't think it's a question of goodwill. We're not asking for goodwill. We're not asking for an act showing attentiveness. We're asking for the role of women to be considered in the institutions. A organisation in Italy has conducted a study which shows on a scientifically demonstrated basis that the presence of women in administrative boards make it easier for them to withstand crises.
Thank you very much, Ms. Toya. I now give the floor for 1 minute to Member Utterson.
Thanks, Chair. I will start off rejecting outright what I've just heard, claiming that that men can't be interpreters and women can't be drivers. That's mindless sexism. That's what we have to contend with in this House. On the on the matter at hand. The financial institutions in Europe cannot be dominated by men. There's a blatant example of this in the ECB board. Ms. Houtenschlager and her colleague who occupied important jobs will be replaced by men. Econ Committee has often called on the Commission to send us lists of candidates with a balance, but this hasn't happened. It's a crying shame. And seeing what's happening in European society with the mass mobilisation of women in March, if the Parliament wishes to exercise its rights and if we all see eye to eye, we need to ensure that we are sent other proposals if we do not agree with the list of candidates.
Thank you very much, Mr. Otterson. Mr. Sosnish, I think your quota of blue cards for today has been used up, so I won't give you the floor now. Mr. Pietikäinen has the floor.
Thank you.
What was that, Terry?
The Parliament has many times talked.
There aren't enough women, we're told, in decision-making posts in finance, and every...
It's not a question of not having women or girls who get proper education or who are qualified in the field of economic affairs and monetary affairs and also in a private economic. It's not the question of women not having enough experience. It's rather that men fail to see that women are qualified and women are not even nominated on the shortlist. And this is not a question of balance, gender balance alone. The problem is not only there, the problem is quality too. Are we going to leave half of our know-how and skills unused? I propose that in future we do the same as with candidates for the Commission. Each and every member state should nominate both a man and a woman as a candidate for the Commission, and then only it will be chosen who is going to be elected to the Commission.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pietikäinen. For 1 minute, Ms. Blinkevičiūtė has the floor.
Thank you, President. On Thursday, we will have to vote to approve or reject appointments to important posts in the EU economic and monetary institutions. And all the candidates presented to the Parliament are men. Women are not sufficiently represented in banking and monetary institutions, only 15%. Colleagues, it is hard to believe that in this 21st century we still have to fight and remind that one of the fundamental EU principles, that of gender equality, has to be implemented also in appointing heads and board members of EU institutions. Respect of the principle of gender equality is enshrined not only in the treaties, but also in at least the 3 regulations defining the work of the EU financial institutions. How could it be that the EU does not respect its own law? The European Parliament demands that gender balance is respected in all EU and other institutions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Blinkevičiūtė. It's now time for Catch the Eye. Member Faria has the floor.
Thanks very much. First and foremost, I would like to reject what Mr. Sosniers said. His words should not have been allowed. As the rapporteur for integrating the gender perspective across the board, I deplore the fact that 3 nominations such as that for the ECB were awarded to men. We are trying to stand up for equality and human rights in Europe. How can it happen that when we roll out or try to roll out our values, we just perpetuate a culture headed up by men? People contend that these men are the best qualified, but that won't fly. We want to have the best qualified people, but how come they are always men? Why do we still have this stigma of having women in leading positions? We need to be at the vanguard of opportunity and gender equality, I would call on the members of the Econ Committee and the Member States to promote more candidacies for women.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ferreira. Ms. Grappini, you have the floor.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, we are having a debate here, not for the first time, about gender balance. Gender balance is a necessity. It's more than just a slogan. And if you look at gender balance in the economic institutions, we have to recognise that there are shared responsibilities here. Who puts forward commissioners? We talked about 9 female commissioners. It's the member states. Well, I think that means we have to come back to the key issue, which is education here. In this century, we've had men in Parliament who haven't been very well educated about gender balance and so on, who think that they're the only ones who should be in Parliament. So the Parliament, Commission and Council, I think, should demonstrate transparency and good intention with regard to putting forward women. It's also a question of vice presidents and so on in Parliament. Member states need to shoulder their duty and put forward those candidates because we've got laws on gender balance. How many women do we have as governors or vice governors of central banks? We need to ensure that the member states put in practice this policy of gender balance.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Ms. Bandi-Vandika.
Gracias, Presidente, Comisaria.
Thank you very much. These appointments to the economic institutions of the EU show that we are not listening to the clear voices heard on the 8th of March. The clamour is building each year. In celebrating the anniversary of the euro, we only hear men speak, so we're not on the right path. Equality is fairer, it's more democratic, but it's also more profitable. We are ignoring talent, losing potentially excellent candidates. They are there. We need to believe in them. We need to appoint them. And that is why we should block these appointments. On the 8th of March, I got a picture on my phone which said everything. Think about the career path as an athletics course. No obstacles on those for men, but on the one for women you have children, washing machines, domestic tasks. Our sprint is never free of obstacles. That's the problem that we need to resolve with laws and self-analysis. Thank you very much indeed. Member Etheridge, you have the floor.
Thank you. As a firm believer that women are as capable, if not more capable than men in many things, I find the idea of having to give extra assistance to women extremely patronising. I also think that when the self-same people who are saying that yes, there should be more women put forward and there should be artificial ways of pushing women into these roles they don't currently hold, or at least not so many of them currently hold, they're the self-same people who, were there more women in these roles than men, would be celebrating it as a great victory for the progress of liberation of women's rights. They wouldn't say, hang on, where's the gender balance? We all work better as a team. Where are the men? They wouldn't be saying that. This is just another way of virtue signalling. Women are good enough, intelligent enough, and in the modern world educated enough to take top positions without anyone here having to ruffle their hair saying, good girl, go on, go ahead yourselves. They can do it without that kind of patronising.
Thank you, Mr. Etheridge. Ms. Jäätteenmäki, you have the floor.
Arvoisa puhemies.
Thank you, President. My colleague Sirpa Pietikäinen made an excellent speech here. It's not a question of not having enough qualified women for high posts in the ECB and other institutions in the field of the economy. The question is that people do not want to see these women who are qualified. Can somebody seriously say that in the member states in the EU there are not qualified women for any posts, any high posts? for the ECB or other financial institutions. How can anybody dare say that? Was what Mr. Sosnierz said. He said terrible things about women. On the other hand, it is excellent indeed that we hear differing opinions too, because this kind of speech that Mr. Sosnierz just made is quite common in Europe. Without people like Sosnierz, there would be much more women in high posts. It's a question of attitude more than anything.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yetenmeki. That brings us to the end of the Catch the Eye procedure. And members, what I would like to do now is say that I've followed this debate very closely. And I can support pretty much everything that's been said, with some exceptions. However, I don't mind whether I'm called chair or president or Mr. Deputy Speaker. The English language has developed a term chairman and chairwoman, which has become chairperson, but quite often now that is shortened to chair. And I think instead of chairperson, chairwoman or chairman, the language has become so impersonal that we now talk about an obstacle, a piece of furniture, than an individual, and it makes me feel very uncomfortable. I don't want to name any individual colleague in that regard. We now, for the Commission, have Commissioner Jourova to take the floor.
I don't know if I will not make a mistake, but I would dare to title you Mr. President. Honourable members, Mr. President, thank you for a very interesting debate. I will add a few comments. We have enough very well qualified women for the financial sector. When speaking about the sectors and the deficit, we see the deficit in relation to qualified women in the technology and IT sector. But for the financial sector, we do have enough highly qualified women. Out of 62% of university graduates who are women, we have a lot of very well qualified economists and financial experts. And indeed, we have surveys which say that in the companies and in the financial sector, in the banks, where there is diversity on boards, where there is balanced representation, there is more balanced decision making. And these are surveys which took lesson from the financial crisis, which say clearly that the men have more tendency to take irresponsible and dangerous, excessive risk decisions. So this is not my invention. This is what we see in the facts and from the data collected from many institutions, and that's why it's good to have diversity on boards and to have this balanced decision making. That's why I think that it will be good if we work together for the future on the procedures which will guarantee better representation of women by means of fair competition. And this is what I introduced already in the current version of Women on Boards Directive, where we say the first stage in decision making in the selection process must be looking at the qualification, expertise, experience, so the professional ability and capability to do the job, and then the person whose gender is underrepresented should be given the priority. I think that this is very fair, and in fact it's gender neutral, because it can be a man who will get the priority one day. So I think that we should look into these processes and make them more fair. I do this job of Gender Equality Commissioner already for the 5th year, and I heard a lot of different myths and also lies One of them I heard today also, that we are different. Of course we are different. We have different way of thinking, and that's why we should have this balanced representation. We are different as individuals. I come from a totalitarian country. When I hear about equality, I am nervous, because I lived in the regime which imposed equality. We are individuals, we are differently capable to do the jobs, and don't tell me that we have a problem from this gender point of view. The second myth, speaking about the quota which was introduced in this Women on Boards directive, and which some of you call for to be used in the process for financial sector, I hear sometimes that by means of quota, a woman will replace fantastic, well-educated men. It's not true. So I want to be well understood. I plead for fair competition. So this is necessary to follow. On the excessive risk-taking and the lessons learned after the financial crisis, I think it was Neelie Kroes who said that financial crisis would not come if it is Lehman Sisters, but it was Lehman Brothers, so that's why we had the problem. Last two comments. We had a few minutes ago a lot of very beautiful young people around here. When I speak to young ladies, when they visit me, the stagiaires and the students, the young women do not speak about some discrimination. They are just ready to go for it. And I think that we should also fulfill the task of encouraging, helping them to have higher self-confidence and to be ready to do demanding jobs, because the low self-confidence, according to many surveys, is one of the barriers for women to go for these high jobs and to break some kind of risk avoidance feature which we as women also sometimes have. Last comment on what we heard from Mr. Sośnierz. Yes, horrible things. I don't agree with what I heard from Mr. Sośnierz, but ladies and gentlemen, I was here yesterday. We had a debate about aquaculture and about the protection of fish and animals, and I heard yesterday that fish do not deserve our protection because they don't have voting rights and that they are not taxpayers. So today, speaking about the women, I heard softer language, so thank you for that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Commissioner Jourova. To conclude this section, on behalf of the Council, Ms. Chiot.
Honourable members, ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, I would like to assure you once again that, as regards appointments to finance-related EU bodies, the Council is fully committed to promote gender balance while acting strictly as it is required by EU law. I also hope that I have been able to clarify the Council's role in these processes. Thank you very much once again for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed. 5 submissions were made. The vote will take place on Thursday.
Ich unterbreche die Sitzung für
A brief pause.